Hi and hello, watch fans, and welcome to another edition of the Real Time Show with me, your friendly neighbourhood watchmaker, Rob Nuds, my co-host, Alan Ben Joseph, and one of Ireland's leading lights in the watchmaking industry, John McGonigle. John, it's a pleasure to have you here and to talk to you today about your past, present, and future, looking ahead with your new brand, Oiléan watches. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me on, Rob and Alan. It's a pleasure.
It's good to get you on the airwaves at last. We struggled a little bit with some technical issues beforehand, but I really appreciate your patience and getting it sorted and figuring it out, because we have been looking forward to this one for quite some time. You are a man on an island in many ways. There aren't a huge amount of big names in Irish watchmaking, but yours has spread across the continent for many reasons. Could you please give us a little bit of a background into your life before you got into watchmaking and how your journey in this industry began?
Well, I suppose the inspiration for watchmaking came from my father, who worked in the newspapers. He was a compositor by trade, but he used to repair clocks and many other things for people. He was very, very handy. And we used to always have people dropping off repairs to the house. And so I grew up in that environment where we had clocks either for repair or under repair all around the place. And wherever we had flat surfaces in our house, you had a clock, or rather than pictures on walls, we had clocks hanging. So it seemed like it wasn't a surprise that I was drawn towards clockmaking or watchmaking. But you really have to have a desire to do that. And I was always fascinated with mechanical things. And I thought I'd end up in engineering or something like that. And my father suggested the watchmaking school in Blanchardstown in Dublin. And once I started there, I knew exactly what I wanted to do for the rest of my career. I really fell for watches.
So when was that exactly? What year are we talking?
It was 1986 when I started the college, and it was a 3-year course.
Crazy.
And yeah, it is crazy because it sounds it's the equivalent of saying the 1940s to me for my children. Which is kind of terrifying, but it doesn't seem that long ago.
No, I can imagine it. Funnily enough, I was born not too far away from that college the year before you started. So when I was a little baby, we would have been in the same city. And now here we are 36 years later.
I thought I recognized you.
I haven't grown much, that's for sure.
Where are you from?
I was born in Dublin.
Oh, okay.
I grew up most of my childhood in Manchester. So I was only a tiny wee baby in those days.
One of my first jobs was in Manchester. I worked there for a year.
Oh, crazy. That's funny how these things like overlap over time, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You went to college and you qualified, and then what happened immediately afterwards? Did you go work for yourself or did you go work for someone else, and in what capacity did you do that?
My first job was with a clockmaker in Cork, Philip Stokes. Himself and his father, they used to do all of the outdoor clocks, the terror clocks and exhibition clocks, if you want, around the country. They both installed them and made them. And he also had clock restoration. That was the main part of his business. And I did his watch repairs. So I did that for about 6 months. And when I started, I told him that I'm really trying to get a job somewhere else because I knew I wanted to go as far as I could in watchmaking. And at the time in the 80s in Ireland, you would be very, very lucky to see a Rolex or an Omega come through the door, not mind complications or anything like that. And the first opportunity I had to go, after spending a fabulous 6 months in Cork, it really is my favourite city in Ireland. And it was a real pleasure working for Philip. But I got a call to start this job in Manchester, in Altrincham. And it was a branch of an American chain of stores that dealt in very high-end watches such as Rolex, Patek Philippe, Piaget, brands like that. And the idea was that I would work in Manchester for a year. And because I was working within the organization, it would be easier to process a green card to move to one of their branches in Florida. After a year of working on some really quite nice watches, I started to feel a little bit of frustration because it felt like I was taking apart these watches, cleaning them, and carefully putting them back together. My interaction with the watches was quite superficial, and I really wanted to get into the nuts and bolts of how they actually worked, how they were put together, rather than nervously just taking them apart, cleaning them, and putting them back together in the hope that they would work at the very end. So I knew I had to go to Switzerland. So my every effort was to get to Switzerland thereafter. I didn't go to the States in the end.
Funny old journey that you've taken. And bizarrely, I spent a lot of my early years in Cork or nearby in Crosshaven,
Oh,
where some of my friends live. Bizarrely, and I agree, it's one of the most beautiful places in Ireland, one of my favourite places in the world. And the British School of Watchmaking is not too far away from Altrincham. It's on the Altrincham tram line from Manchester City Centre, Dane Road, and that's where I trained as a watchmaker. So I
okay.
tell you what a bizarre load of coincidence. And Florida, you never made it over to Florida. Well, good on you, because I hate Florida. It's too muggy.
Yeah. What were you doing in Crosshaven? Like, did you like? I go down there a lot.
Well, just coincidentally, my dad's best mate, a guy called Dr. Ken Higgs, resided there with his family. They knew each other when they worked together at Trinity College in Dublin.
Hmm.
And after we left Dublin, we moved down to, Wicklow, Stratford on Slaney, where I spent my very early years. And we just saw them frequently in Crosshaven because, my dad didn't have many friends. He still doesn't have many friends. He's a bit of an arsehole, but he's a lovely guy, really. But Ken's a lovely bloke. So, we used to spend a lot of time down there with him and his wife, Betty, and their kids, Emily and Rowan. And Rowan was my hero when I was younger. He was a few years older, and I loved it there. I thought that their house in Crosshaven was like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my life. I mean, obviously the setting on the coast with the cliffs and whatnot is really nice as well, but their bathroom was entirely clad in pine, like floors, walls, ceilings. It was like super, like 1990s Alpine chic.
Yeah.
So, I thought it was amazing. Probably lined the road towards Switzerland for me in those early days without me realizing. But that's why. Anyway, enough about those curious overlaps. I'm going to shut up and let Alon ask a question because I know he's itching to get into the conversation. And like he said, he's been a fan of yours for a long time, and I can't wait to hear what it is he wants to know from you.
Thank you so much, Rob. I almost fell asleep. All kidding aside, it's actually a beautiful bridge to the Irishness of everything. So, John, nice to meet you. I've been actually admiring you from afar, and you and your brother are together with the legendary and infamous Dutch brothers, the Groeneveld brothers.
That's right. Yeah.
The two magic duos.
Oh, we're very close friends. In fact, Stephen and Tim, they shared a house for a year when Stephen first moved to Switzerland. Yeah, there were two young bachelors in their 20s in Switzerland. You can just imagine what that was like. And they managed to get some work in as well.
They still think they're bachelors by the quantity of beers they consume.
I've fallen by the wayside. I can't keep up with those guys, but they're great. Yeah. They're brilliant, and what they've done as well is absolutely outstanding.
So, did you guys? I believe you all. Well, you worked at Audemars Piguet. I know they did. Did you work at the same period in Le Brassus?
I did, but they didn't really work in Audemars Piguet. They worked in that offshoot place, Renault Papi down the road. They worked in Le Loc, and at the time it was just called Renault Papi. It had been bought by Audemars Piguet. They renamed the plant, I think, after Bart and Tim had left. But I worked in Le Brassus. We were friends at the time because there was a big expat community of watchmakers, and we used to spend weekends in each other's respective valleys, either Le Loc or Le Sentier Le Brassus. So we were friends with people like Vianney Halter, Stephen Forsey, Peter Speak, Andreas Strehler, the list goes on, Stepan Sakraneva. We're kind of a gang a little bit, it was great fun. So we saw a lot of each other in those days. Subsequently, when Bart and Tim had returned to Holland, I did some work with Renault Papi. So I worked in the same workshop as them, but not at the same time.
To get our dear listeners quickly up to speed, today, John is running his own brand which sounded like my name, so it became almost my favorite brand out there because it sounds like Alon, but it actually means island, right, in Gaelic.
That's correct. Yes.
For our listeners who are on the road while they're listening to this amazing interview, it's spelled Oilean, and you can find it online at Oilean.watch. So it's Oilean.watch. Sorry, John, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because I was looking for, and I couldn't use my name because I had started McGonigle watches with my brother Stephen, and it was tricky to work in two different locations. Stephen's in Switzerland, I'm in Ireland, and so I opted to leave, and Stephen is continuing with McGonigle watches, and I was looking for a name that would be a brand name that I was comfortable with, that would kind of represent what I do, where I am, and I came up with the Irish word for island, which is Oiléan, and it kind of neatly it's a nice metaphor for my place in the watchmaking world, off on my own, and also it describes geographically where I am. Island it is, Oiléan it is.
Elon, so I need to have one on my wrist now.
Absolutely.
I maybe want to trace back. Usually we go chronologically through somebody's track record in the watchmaking industry on this show. But it's actually very fascinating because both of you brothers are epic watchmakers and you have your made your mark in the Swiss and global watchmaking industry. So during the pandemic, you amicably amicably split with your brother. He's in Switzerland, as you mentioned, and you're in Ireland. You started in the pandemic Oiléan Watches. Maybe you could share your philosophy for, well, we know why you started your own brand, mostly due to logistics. So the current model we see now is lovely. I believe you used old stocks of Valjoux 88 calibers, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
Yeah, beautifully made bare. It's not skeletonized, but they're blank dials or transparent dials. And I believe you use titanium cases.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
So maybe let's start with that. I love titanium. Why did you opt for titanium? Because most gentlemen like you who really work with horlogerie, because that's what you and your brother always did and still do. Why titanium, John?
I like titanium myself. I like titanium and steel, which is the other option I was considering. And I wanted the emphasis of the watch really to be on the craftsmanship of the movement. And rather than having resources tied up in a precious metal case, I thought that if I could have a finish that would be normally applied to a precious metal case, to a base metal case, if I could call it, or a non-precious metal case, that it would have a very, very similar value. I think Audemars Piguet led the way with the Royal Oak, where they started treating the finishes on a steel case the way you would on a precious metal case. It was a bit of a revolutionary move back then. And I think that people have gotten used to the idea of very high-end watches not being in a precious metal case. It felt comfortable for me, that idea. And I wanted a watch that was a daily wear for a lot of people. And so I think, again, a non precious metal case fits that bill. Also, it's a big movement. I don't like feeling a heavy watch on my wrist. So the combination of the big movement and the very light titanium case makes for kind of a neutral weight. You can feel it's on your wrist, but it's not, you don't have that very heavy weight on your wrist. So again, it makes it more agreeable for a daily wear.
It's lovely, and I love the transparent dial. Is it a sapphire transparent dial you used?
Yes. It's the only Valjoux 88 I've ever seen where the underdial work is visible. I didn't want to make it too cluttered. The visibility or the legibility of a watch is very important to me. Rather than having something skeletonized or the mechanism very prominent, I tried to fade it back somewhat by putting it under a smoked sapphire crystal. So you can see the mechanism, but it fades back to enable the legibility to be clearer.
I absolutely love it. I'm a huge fan of smoked sapphire dials in general because I'm actually not a fan of skeletonization. I like legibility and clarity, but every so often it's a real treat to be able to see what's going on the dial side of a movement. And I honestly think this is the perfect way to do it. And it looks so cool with the day and the month windows right there at the very top, and the symmetry is so beautiful. And the hands are a great design as well. So I'll stop waxing lyrical about this wonderful watch on the front side and turn it over, because there is a very specially shaped bridge in the middle of the movement. Am I right in thinking that's inspired by a harp?
That's absolutely correct. There are a few harp motifs around the watch. More obviously, there's one on the crown. If you look at the side of the lugs as well, to try and thin the watch, I added some detail to the side of the lugs, and it's a harp motif. I didn't want to overdo it. In everything I've done with Oiléan, and what we tried to achieve with McGonigle as well, was putting in styling cues that were suggestive, subtle, rather than very obvious. But the bridge, it worked well because it's very dominant, and it's also an opportunity to show off some very nice finishing as well.
Yeah, I think it works fantastically. It is subtle enough, like if you didn't know what you were looking at, or if you didn't have any sort of previous experience with Irish iconography, I guess it might float under the radar entirely, which is the best way for it to be. It's not too shouty. Is the bezel slightly concave?
It is. Impose a constraint on myself from the outset in that I wanted outside diameter of the watch not to exceed 40 millimeters. Again, I'm thinking about wearability. But in doing so, because it's a thick movement, you have a chronograph mechanism, you've got the time only mechanism, and then you've got the calendar mechanism. Plus, you have in the center, you have got 4 hands stacked on top of each other. And it just makes for a very tall movement. And that tallness is emphasized the more you reduce the diameter. It would have been easier to design the watch if it was a 42 mil, but I didn't want a watch that big. And so I had to do a lot of visual tricks to reduce the height. And as you nicely observed, the concave bezel is one of those tricks. But another one is if you look at this, the watch from its side, the case tapers as it extends to the back. So it's 40 mil on the top, and the case tapers to, I think it's 38 mil at the back. And all of these are an effort to slim down the watch visually, and I think it works,
And it's lovely, and I love the fact that you hollowed out the lugs on the outside of the case. It's very beautifully done. I am buzzing of excitement and listening to you. So I have a zillion questions. One that worries me the most. I read that you only make 8 a year, so I assume you make them all yourself by hand. Is the case made in Ireland?
No, it's not. No, I use established case. We've never tried to make a case because it's not my speciality. And but I don't work on my own. I'm very lucky to be joined now recently by watchmaker Nick Wolf, who has gained great experience both in Patek Philippe. He was a teacher in the Wostep School, and he worked with Roger Smith for a couple of years as well on the Isle of Man. But even with the two of us together, we're just making 8 a year. Now, we could get more out, but I really want some time and space to perhaps work on other things and develop the next model.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there are 2 of us at the moment.
Understood. Amazing for him to join you. Congratulations for both of you. You need that time to make this beautiful watch. Do you have limitations on the accessibility of this legendary old caliber? I mean, I assume ETA that owns Valjoux today, they don't make them, do they still?
No, they don't. These movements were made perhaps in the 1970s, and I have enough movements to keep me going for quite a while. The method of making these watches or crafting these watches is really what imposes the 8 watches a year limit, because it's incredibly slow. I think it would have been easier if we had started with unfinished components that weren't put together, but we were starting with watches that were essentially functional. And by stripping them down to a component part, you've the job of building everything up. But before you do so, you have to take everything apart in a very so I'm machining parts to separate the different elements, the way I can finish each element, and then I have to make linking parts to put them back together again. So it's very slow. I thought with Nick coming in that we'd find ways of going much quicker, but both of us are kind of in agreement. This is what we have to do to get the watch that we hope at the very end. There's no quick way of making it. It's just slow work, or else the work gets compromised. We can't do that.
To obtain one, you do direct to consumer. Is everything sold through you, or do you have actually retailers in the world that work together with you?
Well, I've been working with Pietro from the limited edition.
Yes, he's lovely.
Pietro is an absolute prince. He's a wonderful man to work with, and he has done an awful lot for so many independents. And I think he's trusted by independents and clients alike because he takes the time to understand and communicate what it is we do. So other than that, it's direct sales.
Petro indeed is a great ambassador for independent watchmaking. He's a role model for me as a retailer, and we already booked him to come on the Real Time Show, so we're very excited for that. And it's amazing to hear that you have the same feeling.
He also works with another Irishman, Johnny McElheran,
Yeah,
who has his own website, and but the two of them they've done an awful lot of work for independent watchmakers. It's €32,000 before tax and delivery charges. So
amazing. And what's the current waiting list if you would put a deposit down today?
it's mid 2025.
Wow. I'm happy to hear that there's so many people queued up. So congratulations on that. My last question. I'm sorry, I'm hijacking the show a bit, Rob. I apologize. I'm a bit too excited. You already said that you wanted some time to think of new stuff. Is there a new watch or model in the pipeline? And is there something you could share?
There is, and it's very tentative at this stage. All I can say really is it will be more handmade. In that it's not working off an existing caliber. So it will be probably a more expensive watch, more likely a more expensive watch, and but it's still some time off. We've our first commitment really is taking care of the people who've placed orders with us, and I am trying to squeeze in some development time at the same time, but it's our priority is taking care of our clients first.
That's really interesting to go even higher end, and certainly an idea that I think will meet with success. But I'm kind of keen, as a Irish-born man myself, to see more Irish brands on the horizon. So, is there any thought to creating a more affordable entry-level brand, which takes some of the things you've learned from your high complication work and makes them more widely available to the public? And maybe starting a new brand, I guess, would be the way to do it, because you set your stall out with Oiléan now, and that's where it's going to function in that top end right there. But do you think there's any scope for that, like a more accessible Irish brand?
There are a few more accessible Irish brands already. My brother Stephen, has a second brand, McGonigle watches. Don't have the exact price, but it's in around the 10,000 mark, which it's more accessible. It's still a lot of money for what it is. I think it's very, very good value. And you also have Siderius, Brian Leach, another Irish brand. Very, very beautiful watches. And again, the price I don't know exactly, but I think it could be about 4,000 or something like that. And you have Graham Houghton with his two brands, SAS watches and Melita watches, and they're more affordable again. Very high end design. Indeed, Graham has worked with me on Oiléan with the design work. So there's a fair bit going on here, but I think there's scope to do a lot more. I'm planning on giving a talk, which actually will be live streamed. I'm giving 2 talks, one at the end of this month and one at the end of next month, on that very thing. The talks are divided into 2. The first one is, sorry if I'm plugging this unannounced, you weren't aware of this, but one of the talks is on how watches are made, and the second talk is on how the various complications work, from tourbillons, chronographs, minute repeaters, perpetual calendars. But the main thrust behind it is to get people thinking about a watchmaking industry here in Ireland.
Okay, well, the first thing is you're more than welcome to plug anything that you do. In fact, we encourage it actively because, this is a show that is focused on what's really going on in watchmaking, real people, real talk, as Alan likes to say, about watches, about everything to do with time. So if you're giving some presentations, then I'm sure our listeners, the listeners that are already listening to the Insiders or the Insider podcast, as they're calling it, then they're going to want to listen to what you have to say as well. So how can people listen to these talks that you're giving?
Well, I can give you the details after this with links to the talks. I'm addressing the Institution of Irish Engineers in Dublin, and it's a live talk. It's in an auditorium, but it will be live streamed as well, and I can send the links to you afterwards.
Yeah, that'll be fantastic. So for anyone listening to this show on the way to work or while you're pottering around the house, go on to www.therealtime.show and check out the episode page for John's interview, and you'll be able to find the links there. So you can check out his talk and follow the live stream along there. So you mentioned that one of these talks is going to be focused on complications. What is your favorite complication and why?
I really like perpetual calendars. It's nearly more practical than a chronograph. An awful lot of people like chronographs, but don't actively use them that much, Whereas the perpetual calendar, every time you look at the dial, that information's there. And I just think it's a very elegant function. It's the hook for me is how the mechanism actually works. And I think if people understood how through cams and levers that you can get a little bit of computing going, they'd appreciate it all the more. Also, it can be quite a slim complication as well, which, again, going back to wearability, it appeals to me. I love working on many complications. I love minute repeaters. They're wonderful to tune to a high state of performance, to get the good rhythm, the right speed, the good, clear, loud sound. It's a wonderful challenge to work on them. But I think functionally, I don't know how many people actually use the repeater every single day to get the time told, if you know what I mean. Whereas I really, really love them. I think a perpetual calendar is something that you would use every day if you wore it every day.
It's certainly a good answer because you're absolutely right. It's an elegant and endlessly useful complication. I personally do fall down in the rather generic chronograph crew, but I would say I think I never know whether it's a flyback or a Rattrapant, which one I prefer. I do love a flyback chronograph. I just love like the sort of immediacy of everything. And the watch I'm wearing most at the moment is my Glaciter Original Panamatic date, the 1970s Vibing Orange Special Edition, and that's got a flyback on it, which is, vastly overworked for a chronograph complication, because you're quite right in saying that a lot of people like chronographs but rarely use them. I'm fiddling around with mine constantly. But one of my favorite movements that I ever came across was the Omega Caliber 1151, the little one in the Mark 40, for example, which has like the date, the day, the month, and even a day-night indicator or a 24-hour indicator if you prefer, and like all that information being present on the dial. It's the closest thing I have to a perpetual calendar. It's not a perpetual calendar. But I do agree that when I wear that watch, I'm sort of, I think charmed is the word, actually. I'm charmed by it. How simple a thing it appears to be, but how much there actually is going on behind the dial to make all of that information presentable in a legible and digestible way in such a small space. So, Yeah, I can see where you're coming from in that regard, but will we see other complications from Oiléan in the future? Will we see chronographs? Will we see striking mechanisms? Will we see, I don't know, you tell me, what will we see?
I don't know because I'm still writing that book. But I'm attracted to watches that are not overly complicated. I worked on very high complicated minute repeaters with Westminster chiming, ground complications, that sort of thing. And indeed, while I was working with Christoph Clara after my time at Audemars Piguet, I was developing those calibers. So I know them very intimately. I love working on them, but I think there's something really nice about having a mechanism where clients can see what's happening, and you can have that can be very hard when it's something that's very very complicated to see everything, and things can be concealed under bridges or under dials. Uh, there's something almost poetic about seeing a mechanism that is simple but executed very elegantly with a lot of finishing and everything like that. That's what I like about tourbillons, for example. A high level of finishing with a very, very simple function in its way. It's not just doing something very complicated, but it's doing it very elegantly. Yeah, I think not overly complicated mechanisms are what I see in the immediate future, but I'd never say no to doing a minute repeater or watches like that because I could have an idea that I haven't had yet.
That would be nice to see, or nice to hear, should I say. That would be lovely. Talking to tourbillons, controversial. Well, I don't even know. Do we call it a complication? Some people say it's a complication. Some people say don't.
No, I
No,
don't.
me neither. But yeah, for the general parlance, I guess it is what it is.
I call them a difficulty. uh, because
A
they're
consternation.
yeah, exactly. Well, they're again, it's a really elegant solution to a problem that we don't have anymore, and they're beautiful. And when they're done properly, they're tricky to do. They're it gives a watchmaker a lot of satisfaction to work in a very very fine tourbillon and get it working well.
When people ask me like what a tourbillon is, I sort of say it's the most watchmaking complication in the world, in that nothing that we do in fine watchmaking these days is really as necessary as it once was. You know, we have electronic timers and, quartz timekeepers all around the world, and they are incredibly functional and incredibly accurate and blah, 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 whatever. But mechanical watchmaking still exists for a very good reason of the heart. And the tourbillon, like you said, so elegantly solves a problem that no longer exists effectively. But to be able to create one and to get it humming along perfectly is just such a wonderful star for which to reach. So many watchmakers find themselves obsessed by it. And talking of those many watchmakers that have created tourbillons in the past, which one springs to mind as your favorite, and what is it about that particular execution of a tourbillon that you like? You can name a few, of course. I'm not going to hold you to one choice, but give the listeners an idea of which ones really, really sing to you.
Well, two tourbillons that jump out at me. One would be one of my favorite wristwatches. Period, and it's the Grubble Forsey Invention Piece One. I think that it's kind of a perfect watch. They have this really clever 30 degree angle double tourbillon, but it's not so much what the tourbillon is or what it does. I just think it's the way it's shown, the way it's displayed. The tourbillon is standing proud of the movement. The display is kind of integrated back into the main plate, or so it appears, and it's just and then you've got that big bold slash of a top tourbillon bridge that is not beveled in areas where you would expect it to be, and then perfectly and heavily beveled in everywhere else. So it's just such a bold statement. It's such a beautiful watch. And the other one, a company I really really like that you don't hear that much about is Moritz Grossmann, and they make a really stunning large tourbillon with a very very well designed dial. And I just think that it is constructed more like a pocket watch. It's almost edging towards a pocket watch rather than a wristwatch. just has the look and feel of a handmade watch about it, more so than a lot of contemporary wristwatches. So those two I would single out. I should add as well that I'm very fortunate to do an awful lot of historic pocket watch tourbillons, and it's for their impact, it's very, very difficult to match those. Like the bigger a tourbillon is, the more impactful it is visually, and they're just some of the finest watches I've ever had the pleasure to work on.
What a great answer! Absolutely unexpected on both fronts. I have to say that Greubel Force is a beast, 44 millimeters wide, 17 millimeters thick. But I think the watch maybe ever that makes the most of 17 millimeters of thickness with the depth that it allows the tourbillon and that enormous slashing bridge that you described, running from around the 9 o'clock to around the 6 o'clock marker. It is certainly a striking piece, and a snip at only 540,000 francs when the 33 pieces were available. So yeah, get saving up for that. Interesting that you bring up Moritz Grossman. I don't know if you know this, but I live in Dresden, not too far away from Glasgow.
Oh no, I didn't know that. Right.
Yeah. I've got a soft spot for Moritz Grossman, despite Moritz Grossman not having a soft spot for me. Really pissed off the CEO a couple of years ago when I was there interviewing her, and I wouldn't drop my line of questioning into why she thought it was wise to produce so many, glib and cheap special editions. And I don't mean that monetarily. I mean that like aesthetically and stylistically, and in terms of the subject upon which they're focused, when the core collection of Moritz Grossman is one of the finest core collections in the industry that does not get enough exposure whatsoever. There's so many good models. And yeah, the tourbillons from the Bennu collection, and my particular favorites, the Hamatic and the GMTs, I think that they're divine. And I think that the hand style and the heat treatment of the hands, which takes generally the hands a little bit further than the blue that you'd normally get to a rich violet shade.
Aubergine,
it's gorgeous, right?
Yeah.
Especially against the German silver movements. The purple of the screws on those, slightly yellowish silvered movements. Oh my God, it's heaven. But no, I said to Christine Hutter, the CEO, who is she making this annual Super Bowl special edition for, if not for me? I'm like a huge American football fan. I have been a fan since I was 3 years old, a complete encyclopedia of the last 57 years of Super Bowl era history, and obviously a watch nerd. And I said, if there is one person in the world I could imagine this watch being tailor-made for, it would be me. Every year you release a Super Bowl watch with Moritz Grossman's amazing mechanics on the back and some god-awful, partially cut-through dial with a cheap football motif on the front and the final score and a couple of team colors splashed on there. And I think, honestly, what is this nonsense? How are you putting that into the limelight and allowing that to get the headlines when you have such incredible beauty, like the tourbillons you're describing, right there, barely spoken about in the collection? So, yeah, I agree with you. Moritz Grossman is amazing. One day I hope Moritz Grossman thinks I'm amazing too, but that certainly is not today. Yeah, so some serious watchmaking beef going on there. No, it's all in good fun.
Yeah.
I'm sure she's not really. I'm sure she doesn't lose any sleep.
As you described the movements with that purple color and the untreated German silver, and also the bridges, they're pillar mounted. Which, when have you last seen that? There's kind of a 19th century feel to the watches. And I love them for that. They feel properly handmade. They're wonderful.
Yeah, it really is, and they're doing great stuff. I didn't go to Glasgow that day with the intention of annoying Moritz Grossman. I went there because I was very curious to see what was actually going on inside that enormous factory that they built about 10 years ago now, I guess. This factory that looks like a crashed spaceship that just nestles on the opposite side of the Muglitz River running through Glasgow and dominates that hillside. What was going on inside it, I thought, because we never saw people entering it. We never saw people leaving it. It was a bit like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, like the chimneys.
I was just going to say.
Yeah, no joke, no joke. Like we thought, like, what are they doing? How many people could possibly be in there? Because it's enormous. And the truth of the matter is, it's barely populated. There's about 40 people working there. They could have 300 in that building probably, but it's planned for the future as the brand is intended to grow. And given what their core offering is, it really should. But enough about Moritz Grossman. Your choices of the best tourbillons that you've seen in the industry really surprised and captivated me because of how, say, off the beaten track, at least the Moritz Grossman pick was. And so I'm curious, what other brands do you like, tourbillons aside, but what other things really impress you in the industry, and who's doing stuff that you think that our listeners should pay attention to after they've bought an Oiléan, of course?
Oh yeah, well, that's where you start. I think there's an awful lot of there are very many independents out there that are doing really extraordinary thing. I'll always be a fan of Kari Voutilainen's work. I think that I've hardly seen a watch of his I didn't like. I don't know how he produces so many very diverse watches. It could be between the cases, the dials, working with different artists, that sort of thing. And at the same time, he, at the drop of a hat, will do a one-off movement. It could be a Destined Escapement. He'd do one-off tourbillons. He just seems to have the ability to cater for everybody and not compromise the look or feel of his watches at all. Like they're all unmistakably Kari Voutilainen's, and I think there's a real bravery in the way he works as well. You've got some extraordinary young independents. You've got a Peterman Beda. The quality of what they do, it would embarrass a lot of very established brands. The watches they're so beautifully made and finished. A sports tourbillon that came out. It was nominated for the GPHG awards.
Oh, Theo Offray?
Yes, his tourbillon there again. It's you might see a trend here. It has that vintage look to the movement, the way it's created. It's with the finish on the main plates, but just the architecture. It's not dissimilar to a Grubel Forsey and its architecture. But I just love the way it's made and the way it's finished. And
I can see quite a bit of you in here, actually, to be honest. Like there's some similar shapes and, the sort of level dials and the sapphires. Yeah, very cool. Yeah. Very nice. It did get a mention in one of our earliest episodes. I can't remember if it was episode 1 or 2, but we did a rundown of all of the GPHG nominees. And we both noticed this piece. We didn't pick it as our winner in the category, but we noticed it. There was something about it that really stood out, and it got an honourable mention from us even then. And I think Offray's reputation is set to grow in the coming years, no?
I think so. I think it's just the architecture of the piece is really what works for me, but it's just got some lovely traditional techniques, and it's a real platform to show watchmaking. It works so well as a result of that,
So you seem to be a fan of German silver, as I am, because this one again uses German silver as like the canvas upon which all those great mechanics are set. It's a nice looking thing, right?
Absolutely, and I mean, it does appeal to me, which wouldn't be a defining requirement for me. Of more established brands, but bigger brands. It's a new brand. But Ferdinand Berthoud.
Oh yeah, love it.
Of course, it's an old name. Their watches, I think, are really spectacular. I think it's laudable when a big established brand, because it's backed by Chopard, and it's just an incredible project. I suppose it's a different time and things have changed, but it would be much the same as when Lange was resurrected back in the 90s, and a very different type of watch, but it was a very different era as well.
Yeah,
and but I think the Ferdinand Berthoud watches, it's very, very impressive watchmaking.
It is indeed. Some of my favourites, especially the way that they regularly hide tourbillons on the back, because that's where I like a tourbillon to be. I don't need it to be on the dial oftentimes. I like it hidden away and just that pure watchmaking.
I absolutely agree with that. I think that appeals to me a lot more as well. I love it's what I love about pocket watches.
Uh-huh.
It's a very ordinary looking watch until you turn it over, you open up the back, and there you're hit with this very pure mechanism that doesn't have any distraction with hands or dials or anything like that. There's only one thing to really look at, and it's the tourbillon.
Yeah, I always thought that it just expressed like the true spirit of watchmaking, that so much effort and so much time has been put into something that no one is intended to see, and it's there for the wearer. I mean, I'm sure when you were studying, as it was the case when I was studying, that finishing components on the dial side, normally hidden by a dial, of course, was something that we all took great pleasure in, and something that was like preached as like, really the core principle of proper watchmaking. Like everything gets the full works. It doesn't matter if it's just a show-stopping component or a dial element. It has to be done properly, whether it's a set-in lever or a crown wheel or you name it, like a date jumper, whatever it is. It has to be done as well as it can be done. And I guess that's why I like the smoked sapphire as a compromise, because a lot of those like hidden elements on the dial, they go out unnoticed and unspoken about. But seeing those pieces, just a hint of them, is just a nice reminder that care and attention has been taken in every possible way when it comes to those watches in particular. And Ferdinand Berthaud does that very, very well. You mentioned, of course, times are changing, and it's a different industry now than it was in the 90s, and even it was in the early 2000s. But what have you noticed as a watchmaker on the front line for the last 35 years? What's the biggest difference about the watch industry now than from when you started working in it?
When I started, it was just that the watchmaking was recovering from the quartz revolution, so mechanical watchmaking was decimated. And when companies started remaking complications, it was like an arms race to see how many complications you could fit in a watch. And an awful lot of the thinking was misplaced. You'd see, you'd open up watches with multiple complications, and they were terrible. They were badly made, badly designed, and appallingly finished. And gradually, over the years, that has improved. I think quality is very, very high now. And refreshingly, I think there's more of a tendency towards, rather than high complications, interpretations of single complications. And you could have the chronograph reinterpreted. The Groenevels have done it. MB&F have done a superb job with Steve McDonald. You could have a simple complication, as I described earlier on, just done in a very kind of poetic, very simple way. And I think that's a very good trend, that people are not just trying to pack as many functions into the watch as possible. They're trying to just express a function or express a complication in a new way. It could be a new display, it could be a new architecture, it could be a new way of finishing things, but it has to be done well, and it has to be well designed. And I think a lot of that has made its way into the independents as well, because it's an area where you can see the greatest amount of courage and bravery, because people are, they don't have to they don't have to take care of an established brand image. They can take chances. And I think there are an awful lot of very adventurous watches being made out there. And I think they're selling those watches into a ready market, because that's the other thing that's changed an awful lot. Collectors are far more educated now than they were back then, and they really understand what they're looking at, and it's for watchmakers who really pride the work they do. There are an increasing number of collectors out there to buy their work, So I think it's a very good period in watchmaking. I think we're very lucky.
And what's the state of the Irish industry itself? Is there still a training college in Dublin for young watchmakers, aspiring watchmakers? And if so, or if not, either way, what would be a word of advice from you, something you've learned throughout your career that you would pass on to the next generation?
There isn't the watchmaking. We had a watchmaking school that both myself, my two brothers, I have another brother, Anthony, who is working in Cambodia at the moment as a watchmaker. The three of us went to the same school in Blanchardstown, and it closed down, I think, in 2003, if I'm not mistaken. The talk that the two talks I'm giving both this month and next month, the whole idea of it was driven by the want to reestablish watchmaker training here in Ireland. So I hold out hope that we can restart it. For anyone who would like to get into watchmaking training, I think any of the WOSTEP schools would be very good. It's very good training at the moment. It's probably the best and easiest way to get into it at the moment. And there are a number of them worldwide, of course. As regards watchmakers who are in the process of being trained, the advice I've always given, and will continue to give, is just get the job that will give you the most experience as early as you can, and just keep on striving for getting exposure to good experience, both in learning techniques and learning complications and that sort of thing. And it ends up being a very, very rewarding profession if you follow that route rather than learn the skills.
Fine advice and a fine point upon which to end the interview. John, thanks for your time and thanks for your patience in the early stages of our talk today, getting everything sorted on the technical side of things. That was really, really kind of you. And for our listeners who I'm sure have enjoyed this fascinating episode, if you have any questions for John, you can get in touch via the usual channels. You can contact me either on Instagram at robnudds, that's ROBNUDDS, or via email, which is rob@therealtime.show, or you can contact my co-host Alon Ben Joseph on Instagram at ALONBENJOSEPH, or via email, that's alon@therealtime.show. We'll be back soon. Until then, stay safe and keep on ticking.